try to do as much good possible as efficiently as possible. And that efficiency thing is really fun. If you guys who are listening are out for a challenge, like one of the things that you can, I think this heightens the meaning in your life, is to try to do difficult things, right? Aim high. Don't aim so damn high you can't manage it, and make sure you break down your aims into reasonably attainable sub goals, but you want to aim high, and then you want to see how hyper efficient you can get. That's a great thing to do in your early 20s, is to see, okay, like discipline yourself. You think, okay, how much work can I do if I load myself right to the maximum? How far can I work? How hard can I work until I exhaust myself? And then you back off, obviously, because the optimal amount of working, productive engagement, let's say, is that which is sustainable across decades. So you have to learn that, but you don't learn that without stretching yourself to your limits to begin with. And if your life isn't everything it could be, and if you're suffering from an excess of meaninglessness, well, it means you're not oriented in the world of chaos and order properly. It's like you could learn to discipline yourself. Figure out what it is that you need to do and that you want to do, and then see how efficient you can get. Because one of the things that's quite fun is to figure out, if you have a task, I always tell my graduate students this if they're doing an experiment too, if you have a task that you have to do, it's really interesting to spend a few minutes, sometimes hours, depending on how long the task is, see if you can figure out how to do it from 5 to 10 times faster. It means you'll have to rearrange the way you think about it, but you can often do it. And that's how extremely productive people get so hyper efficient. Sometimes it means you have to delegate. Sometimes it means you have to bring other people aboard. That's delegation as well, I suppose. But there's a lot of preconceptions that you hold about who you are and who the world is that you could dispense with, that would make you a way more efficient actor in the world. Ask yourself what would motivate you. First of all, don't be studying 8 hours a day, because that isn't going to work and you're not going to do it anyways. Would you start studying 5 minutes a day? Seriously, could you bring it up to 10 minutes a day? What would you have to do for yourself to get yourself to sit down for half an hour a day and study intently? Like maybe you'd have to, I don't know what you'd have to do, like have a beer at 6 o'clock at night or something, or maybe you'd have to go for a walk in the park or go out for coffee. It's like, imagine that you're sitting down with a stupid, undisciplined child and you're trying to get that child to do something useful. And you say, okay, look, I want you to do X, it's necessary, but you can pick how much of it you're going to do, and I'll give you what you want if you do it. Well, ask yourself that and see what happens. So don't try to tyrannize yourself, try to negotiate with yourself and use some reward and see how that works. And start slow, maybe you're not very disciplined and the best you can do is half an hour of studying it a day. Well, start with half an hour. Increase that 5 minutes a week. If you do that, that's a lot. If you do that for a year, then by the end of the year, you'll be studying 4 hours a day. So you can, that's just with 5 minutes a week, right? Because that's 250 minutes in a year. So start ridiculously, pathetically. Study for 5 minutes a day for a week, and then move it to 10. You'll be able to do that. And don't cheat, because one of the things people do is they make a deal with themselves like that. I'm going to study for 10 minutes a day, each day. And then they get into it and they think, wow, this is going really good. So they study for 2 hours, and then they've broken the contract with themselves and they don't trust themselves anymore. And then they don't study for a whole year. Or, well, maybe not. For a month. So, but set your contract. Ask yourself, what could I do to move myself forward to my goal that I would do? And then how could I improve that incrementally? You can't exist outside of a framework of value. It's not possible. It's not technically possible. I outlined this in quite a bit of detail in chapter 10, which is called Rule 10, which is called Be Precise in Your Speech, is that the way the world manifests itself to you is integrally tied to your value structure. And that's because, to put it very simply, is that your very vision is dependent on an aim. Like whenever you look at the world, you're aiming at something. You're aiming at something with your eyes. You can't focus on something without aiming at it, and you won't aim at it without valuing it. So your very perceptions are dependent on your value structure. Now that doesn't mean there isn't a world. It does mean that experience is a complex interplay of your value structure and the unmanifest world. It's something like that. And then that begs the question, which is, well, if you have to have a value structure, then what should it be? Well, and then that brings us back to the ideas that we were talking about earlier. Like you should value being. You should take on the responsibility of being as your highest ethical obligation and try to improve it, try to reduce suffering, try to make the most out of yourself in a way that's beneficial to you and your family and your community. You should aim high, and your perceptions will reconfigure themselves around those aims, and that will allow the world to manifest itself to you in the most positive possible manner, or at least in the most meaningful possible manner. And in the absence of that, all you have is stupid suffering. That is the anxiety and depression that we talked about earlier. Without a point, without value, without an aim, all you're left with is the misery and anxiety of life. That makes people bitter.
I love to bring up the notion of the aim, because one can react to this stupid suffering in a number of ways, but this is so clear. You write in it, you say, you cannot aim yourself at anything if you are completely undisciplined and untutored. Mm-hmm. You will not know what to target, you won't fly straight, even if you do get your aim right. And then you will conclude there is nothing to aim for, and then you will be lost. And these days, the prevailing moral framework, as I see it, is if it feels good, do it. How is it that discipline and the straight and narrow offer the best chance for a good life? And how is it that we have forgotten that is the case?
Well, the reason that discipline is necessary is because you're a mass of competing short-term interests. And so the question is then, well, which short-term interests should win out? And the answer to that is, well, none of them. They need to be organized into a hierarchy that makes them functional across time and across individuals. So like a 2-year-old is very likely to act out his or her proximal impulse. But of course, a 2-year-old can't survive in the world. You have to bring your primary instincts, let's say, under the regulatory structure of a higher order value system that allows them to manifest themselves without undue mutual sacrifice across large spans of time in the presence of large numbers of other people. So that requires a very sophisticated ordering. It's like, we already talked about the fact that a meta-narrative is necessary to unite subcultures, say, so that they can operate peacefully and harmoniously within the same space. The same thing applies within you, because you're an internal coalition of warring single-minded tribes, and they have to all be brought under the organizational structure of long-term collective vision, let's say. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, you have to be disciplined. And any discipline, technically speaking, is an attempt to bring all those competing short-term impulses under a larger scale and more inclusive framework. And so you do that, and then, well, that's actually what gives you freedom. Being impulsive and being free aren't the same things, because if you're impulsive, you're just the slave of your impulses.
Right.
There's no freedom in that. That's the same freedom, so to speak, literally, that a 2-year-old has, because a 2-year-old isn't socialized yet. So it's a completely, that doesn't function in the sophisticated world. It doesn't work.
Right.
Everyone knows it.
We just like to pretend sometimes to say, oh, that does feel good, Now, I have one
last...
Well,
we like to pretend all the time, because that's why we go out and drink, because drinking enables you to blind yourself to the long-term consequences of your actions. And there's no doubt that that's very, very rewarding in the short term, but it's also why you wake up the next morning hungover and ashamed. It's very difficult to properly organize your immediate environment. And that's another thing I try to do with the books, is show that some of these so-called simple things, clean your room, it's like, I'll tell you, this is the truth. I've been trying to organize my office for 3 years. I was flooded by so much mail and so much catastrophe that I fell way behind in my ability to keep my closet organized, my clothes organized. I had 3 years worth of mail sitting in my office at the university, thousands of pieces of mail, and it took a lot of work to And it's still not done. I hope I'll have my damn room clean by the time I go out on tour, for symbolic purposes, among other reasons, to have my house in order and beautified again as well. But I like to show that simple things aren't so simple, especially if you try them. You know, I had one client, his mother had died, and there was a large family, and the family kind of fell into disorder after she died because it was all boys, it was all sons and a father, and no one had really picked up the maternal role, you know, the necessary stereotypical maternal role. And he decided he was going to try to do that. And man, you know, his brothers and his father, they weren't happy when he first went to get groceries. You know, they felt that he was kind of trying to take the place of the mother, so there was all that grief that was still there. And then who the hell did he think he was, and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, people's houses aren't in order because that's really hard. It's really hard. And it causes a lot of chaos and strife to try to do it. And so usually it isn't done, and it isn't until you actually try it, like right down to the detail, that you start to understand how difficult it is, and then also how to appreciate. You also start to appreciate how necessary it is. So it's fun shedding light on that sort of thing, and the non-triviality of the ordinary. And part of the reason I concentrate on the individual is because I don't think the things we do are trivial. If you think the things you do are trivial, then you're either bringing a trivial attitude towards them, or you're not doing the things you should be doing, or you're not framing the situation appropriately. So, and you know, you might dispute that, and that's okay, you could, but you know, one thing that my depressive clients, for example, would say, I can't really figure out why anything is worth doing if we're all going to die in the end. It's like, you know, it's fair enough. But I said, I think it was last night at my lecture, I said, if a baby's crying in front of you and you know it's cold or hungry, you don't cease to attend to its distress because the sun is going to envelop the earth in 4 billion years. You think, that's not a good excuse. Well, why not? Why not use that time frame? And your instinctive answer is, well, that's just not the appropriate time frame. And so I would say, well, if you have the habitual inclination to apply to your own life a time frame or an evaluative framework that reduces what you're doing to meaninglessness, then you should consider whether or not you're using the wrong time frame. Right? If it all of a sudden becomes meaningless, pointless, you're suffering in the work you have to do, well, find a time frame that is appropriate, you know, sufficient unto the day, let's say. That's a good start. I was talking to one of the leaders of the Conservatives this morning, and they're asking me about, the person was asking me about Bill C-16, but more specifically about talking to young people, because the Conservative leadership struggle is going on right now. I've been talking to a bunch of them, and I said, well, look, one of the things you could do for young people that no one's doing is to talk to them about responsibility. Because everyone talks to young people about rights. It's like, we need our rights. It's like, oh God, how many rights do you need? You know, really, like you have more privileges than any people who've ever lived anywhere. Well, it's so dull to hear that. It's so dull. It's so pathetic and what would you call it? It's so demeaning that you have to be protected and have your rights. It's like I said, there's a huge marketplace for responsibility. That's what you want to talk to young people about. It's like, get your act together and do something worthwhile with your life. For the first time in my entire adult life, the Conservatives actually have something to sell young people, right? They could sell them responsibility. It's like, well, why? Because that's where life has meaning with responsibility. The more responsibility you take on, the more meaning your life has. And the higher degree of responsibility that you agree voluntarily to try to bear, the richer your life will be. And no one's ever told that, and it's the case. You know, it's like you have 4 kids, say. Well, that's plenty of responsibility. You're going to have meaning. It's going to be rough, you know, because it's complicated. You have a complicated job, and you try to help the careers of the people around you. You try to solve tough problems and aid suffering and do all of that. It's like, it's weight, it's responsibility, but there's glory in it. There's real glory in it. There's deep meaning in it. And young people are starving for that because no one ever tells them that. It's like, you're way more than you think, man. Stand up, do something difficult. Do something difficult and heroic, right? Burst out of your bonds. It's like, that's a good message. It's a necessary message, because we have to be more than we are, because if we aren't, we're not going to survive. Generally, if I engage in conflict, the reason I engage in it is because I think the alternative is worse. And so, you know, if you're trying to settle things with a family member, there's often a terrible minefield that you have to wander through to reach anything approximating a lasting peace, and avoiding it doesn't make it better, and it's terrible to confront it, and it can be virtually beyond your capacity to tolerate to do it, and so people avoid it very frequently, but that doesn't make peace. It just harbors underground resentment and breeds bitterness and hatred, and so that's not, unless that's what you want, that's not a good solution.
Why do you think it is that some of the things that you've said and the way you've gone about kind of writing up your stuff has been such a phenomenon and caused so many people to sit up and pay attention?
Well, I suppose in some sense those things that we take for granted we regard as obvious, but if we take them for granted and we regard them as obvious, and then they're challenged, we often have no idea why they're valuable. You know, so for example, I've had many clients who were considering getting married or not getting married, and they would say to me, well, it's just a piece of paper. And they thought that was a pretty good argument. And that's not a good argument at all. That's an argument that's so shallow that you hardly know where to begin. But, you know, if someone comes up to you on the street and says, defend marriage, it's like, well, what do you know? It's like, how are you going to do that? It's what's so obvious that it's defensible that you don't have the arguments at hand. I mean, you know, you're not a legal philosopher. And so people who do that, they think they're intelligent because they can put you on the spot. And merely the mere fact that you can't articulate a claim you share with almost everyone in some traditional sense doesn't mean either that you're stupid or that the principle itself is invalid. It just means that we tend not to discuss all those things we agree upon. It doesn't mean they're without merit. So the rules, I mean, I've been criticized, my books have been criticized, well, they're, you know, self-help, and I think, well, I'm actually not contemptuous of that, so that criticism doesn't bother me. My clinical practice, many of my clients were brought to whatever philosophical understanding they had through so-called self-help books, and if they were reading books, you know, that's not so bad. And what were they trying to do, improve themselves? I mean, how pathetic is that? And then to pander to an audience that needs self-improvement. You know, it's like, well, so yes, the rules were obvious, but the reasons for them